The neon lights of the bar flickered, casting a dim, pulsating glow over the worn-out tables and empty stools. Keanu Reeves sat at the far end of the bar, his calm demeanor barely noticeable as he nursed a glass of whiskey. His gaze was distant, not lost in thought, but rather focused on the humdrum of the evening, the sound of clinking glasses, the quiet murmur of conversations. Beside him, Jason Statham, his old friend and fellow adventurer, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, taking in the atmosphere. They were here for a quiet night, away from the chaos that often followed their high-stakes lives. But as with everything, peace was a fleeting illusion. "Hey man," Jason muttered, his eyes narrowing. "You noticed that guy?" Keanu raised an eyebrow, glancing toward the center of the bar. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just a group of locals chatting and enjoying their drinks. But then his gaze landed on Mike. He was loud, obnoxious, and clearly enjoying making everyone around him uncomfortable. The guy was leaning back in his chair, mocking the bartender, making lewd jokes and laughing like he was the king of the world. "Yeah, I noticed," Keanu replied, his voice low. "He's been at it for a while now." Mike's obnoxious laughter echoed through the room. He pointed to an older man sitting at the bar, clearly tipsy, and said something that made the entire group burst into laughter. Keanu could see the discomfort in the old man's face. This wasn't just a harmless prank. This was bullying. Jason's hand tightened around his glass, the tension in his posture making it clear that he wasn't about to let this slide. He looked over at Keanu. "What do you think? Should we step in?" Keanu hesitated. He wasn't a fan of conflict, but he could see where this was going. Mike was causing a scene, and if it kept up, the night would only get uglier. "You know how I feel about getting involved in other people's messes," Keanu said, "but it's getting out of hand. Someone needs to stop him before it escalates." Jason pushed his chair back and stood up. "Then I guess it's gonna be us." The two of them moved toward Mike. Their presence immediately felt in the quiet space. Jason's eyes were cold, but there was no aggression, just a steady calm that matched Keanu's. As they approached, Mike noticed them, his smile widening, as if he was ready for another round of fun at someone else's expense. "Well, well," Mike sneered, eyeing Jason and Keanu. "What do we have here? Two tough guys coming to save the night?" Keanu's face remained calm, but there was something behind his eyes that warned Mike to be careful. "We don't want any trouble. Just thought you might want to keep it down." Mike scoffed, standing up and getting closer to Jason, his breath smelling of cheap liquor. "Oh, you're one of those guys, huh? The peacekeeper. You think I'm afraid of you?" Jason didn't flinch. "I'm not here to start something, just finish it before it gets worse." Mike's laugh echoed again, but this time it was different, something darker. He looked around, trying to gauge the room, but the silence from the rest of the bar was deafening. It was clear they were all waiting for something to happen. Keanu and Jason weren't just two guys trying to stop a bully. They were two people who could break a bully in a heartbeat. But what Mike didn't know was that this confrontation wasn't going to be as simple as it seemed. There was a twist coming, one that neither Keanu nor Jason could have predicted. Just as the tension reached its peak, a voice from the back of the bar interrupted the growing silence. "Is everything all right out here?" A tall figure stepped forward, his eyes glinting with an unmistakable coldness. It was at that moment that Keanu realized this wasn't just a random drunk fool looking for a fight. Mike's involvement ran deeper than anyone in the room could have imagined. Keanu glanced at Jason, a knowing look passing between them. Things were about to get a lot more complicated. What would you do if you were in Keanu or Jason's shoes? Would you stand up to the bully or walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter where things take a shocking turn. The air felt thick as Keanu and Jason stood in front of Mike, their eyes now on the mysterious figure who had just entered. The tension in the bar was palpable, and for a moment, everything seemed frozen in time. Mike, clearly oblivious to the growing danger of the situation, puffed out his chest as he eyed Keanu and Jason, waiting for a reaction. But it wasn't the bully's bravado that caught Keanu off guard. It was the man standing behind him, the man who had just spoken. "Do I know you?" Keanu asked, his voice steady but his mind racing. The figure smirked, revealing a face that, though older now, was unmistakable. It was a face from Keanu's past, a past he had tried hard to leave behind. "Keanu," the man said with a tone that was both familiar and chilling. "It's been a long time, you haven't changed a bit." Jason turned to look at Keanu, sensing the shift in his demeanor. Keanu's eyes narrowed, his calm facade faltering for the briefest of moments. "Jack," Keanu said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't expect to see you here." Jack's grin widened as he stepped closer, his presence commanding the room. "Well, you know me, always popping up when least expected." He paused, sizing up the two of them, before his eyes flicked back to Mike. "This guy here," Jack continued, gesturing to Mike, "is my business partner. Thought I'd give him a little help tonight." Keanu's stomach sank. Mike wasn't just a random drunk, he was part of something far bigger than a simple bar brawl. Jason's jaw tightened. "You're involved with him?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Jack shrugged, nonchalantly, as if it were no big deal. "Does it matter? We're all just trying to make a living in this world. You know how it goes." Keanu took a slow breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He hadn't seen Jack in years, not since they had parted ways after a mission gone horribly wrong. Jack had always been more of a loose cannon than Keanu had ever been comfortable with. A few too many risky decisions, too many lines crossed. Jason turned to Keanu, his eyes narrowing. "You know this guy?" Keanu nodded, though it was clear, from the tension in his body, that he didn't want to discuss it further. "Yeah, we go way back," Keanu said quietly. "Jack and we were on a few jobs together. He's not someone I would trust." Jack's smile faded slightly, but he didn't seem bothered by Keanu's reluctance. "Trust is a funny thing, Keanu. You never know when you'll need to put it in someone's hands." Keanu didn't answer right away, but Jason could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about a drunk guy causing trouble. The entire situation had shifted in a way that was far more dangerous, and Keanu knew it. Mike, oblivious to the tension between the three men, laughed again. "What? You guys have history or something? What's this? A little reunion?" He sneered, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. But Jack's attention was now fully on Keanu, his eyes searching Keanu's face for something. A hint of recognition? A spark of old animosity? Keanu couldn't be sure, but he knew that this was far from the end of the conversation. "Maybe it's time to catch up, Keanu," Jack said, his voice low and almost taunting. "There's a lot you don't know. Things have changed since we last saw each other." Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. What was Jack talking about? What had changed? "I'm not interested in your games, Jack," Keanu said, his voice firm now. "I have got nothing I want." Jack's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Keanu saw a flicker of anger in his old comrade's eyes. "I think you'll find you're wrong about that. But for now, let's just say I'm happy to see you again. It's been a long time coming." Jason stepped forward, clearly sensing that this conversation was going to spiral out of control. "All right. Enough with the cryptic talk. If you've got a problem with us, we'll settle it right here, right now." Keanu put a hand on Jason's shoulder, signaling him to back off for now. "Not here, Jason," he said quietly, his eyes locked on Jack. "We don't want to make this public." Jack's smirk returned, but this time it was tinged with something darker. "No, we don't," he agreed. "But soon. You'll see. We'll talk more. Soon enough." With that, Jack turned and nodded to Mike. Without another word, the two of them started to leave, but not before Jack's voice floated back to them. "You're not done here, Keanu. Trust me." The door swung shut behind them, and the room seemed to exhale, the tension lingering in the air. Jason looked at Keanu, waiting for some kind of explanation. "Who was that?" Jason asked, his voice a mix of concern and confusion. Keanu exhaled slowly, trying to calm the storm inside his mind. "Jack was someone I used to work with. We were close, but things fell apart a long time ago." Jason frowned. "And now he's here with that guy. This doesn't feel like a coincidence, Keanu." Keanu nodded grimly. "No, this is bigger than we thought. What would you do if someone from your past showed up, and it wasn't a friendly reunion? Share your thoughts with us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter, where things get even more intense." The night had taken a turn that neither Keanu nor Jason expected. What was meant to be a quiet evening in a nondescript bar had now turned into a confrontation with a shadow from Keanu's past, one that was far from resolved. As they sat back down at their table, the air felt heavier, thicker with unspoken questions. Jason took a long gulp of his drink, his eyes never leaving Keanu. "So what's the deal? Who's Jack, really? You didn't seem too thrilled to see him." Keanu stared into his glass, his fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly as he gathered his thoughts. The warmth from the whiskey barely touched the coldness that had settled in his chest. "Jack and I go way back," Keanu began, his voice quieter now, a distant sadness in his eyes. "We were in the same business for a while. Mercenaries, hired guns, whatever you want to call it. We did a lot of work together, but somewhere along the way we started going in different directions. He's not the same person I knew." Jason's gaze softened. "You don't have to tell me everything, but I can tell this guy means more than just another shady past. What happened?" Keanu let out a deep breath, his shoulders tense. "There's more to it than just the work we did. It was personal. Jack, he became obsessed with power, control. He started making decisions that didn't sit right with me. Things went south on one of our jobs. After that, I cut ties with him." Jason's eyes narrowed. "And now he shows up with a guy like Mike? You don't think that's a coincidence, do you?" Keanu shook his head slowly. "No, it's no coincidence. Jack's always been about building something bigger, bigger than just jobs, bigger than money. But what I didn't realize is how deep he'd gone, how tangled up he was in something dangerous. He's always had a way of pulling people into his mess." Jason leaned forward, his voice steady. "So, what does that mean for us?" Keanu met Jason's, eyes a grim determination settling on his face. "It means that whatever Jack's involved in now, it's big, and it's only a matter of time before it comes crashing down on everyone around him, including us." The weight of Keanu's words settled between them. Jason remained silent for a moment, absorbing the gravity of the situation. But Keanu's instincts had never failed him before, and Jason trusted them. "Then we need to be ready," Jason finally said. "We don't know what Jack's capable of, but we sure as hell won't be caught off guard." Keanu nodded. "I agree, but there's something else. The guy he's working with, Mike, he's not just a random thug. Jack doesn't waste his time with just anyone. Mike's connected, and that connection is dangerous." Before Jason could respond, the bartender approached their table, a frown creasing his brow. "You guys all right? Everything okay with that guy?" he asked, glancing toward the door where Jack and Mike had exited. Keanu gave him a small smile, trying to mask the tension in his voice. "Yeah, we're good. Just some old acquaintances." The bartender raised an eyebrow but said nothing more, retreating back to the bar. Keanu and Jason exchanged a glance, both sensing that the calm moment wouldn't last long. Mike and Jack might have left, but this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the night wore on, the two of them tried to go back to their drinks, but their thoughts kept drifting back to what had just transpired. The peaceful hum of the bar was now a background noise, irrelevant to the storm brewing ahead. Keanu knew that Jack's reappearance in his life was no accident. The only question was what Jack wanted, and how far he was willing to go to get it. Then, as the evening wound down, another unexpected event took place. Keanu's phone buzzed with a new message. His heart skipped a beat as he saw the name on the screen. Jack. Keanu glanced at Jason, who raised an eyebrow. "A message from him?" Keanu nodded, his mind already spinning with possibilities. "This can't be good." He opened the message, the words cold and calculated. "You don't have much time, Keanu. I'm not the only one you need to worry about. Get ready. The game's about to change. Meet me tomorrow night, same place. If you want to stay ahead, you'll show up, but be careful. There are things you don't know yet." The chill that ran through Keanu wasn't from the message itself. It was the sense that something was coming, something far darker than he had prepared for. Jack's cryptic words felt like a warning, but also a challenge. Whatever game Jack was playing, Keanu was now caught in it, and the stakes were higher than ever. Jason leaned over, scanning the message. "What the hell is that about?" Keanu put the phone down, his expression hardening. "He's playing games, Jason, but he's not going to get away with it. Tomorrow night, we find out what he's really up to. Jason nodded, standing up. Let's be ready. The two of them knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. Whatever Jack was planning, it was going to change everything, and Keanu was going to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. The following evening felt eerily quiet as Keanu and Jason prepared for the meeting with Jack. The usual hum of the city outside their window was subdued, as if even the streets knew something tense was about to unfold. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far beyond a simple confrontation. Jack's words from the message still echoed in his mind, carrying with them a warning and a sense of foreboding that weighed heavily on him. They met in the dimly lit hotel lobby, neither of them speaking as they gathered their things. Jason's eyes were sharp, and Keanu could feel the tension radiating off of him. Jason had always been quick to jump into action, but tonight, even he was on edge. They both knew that tonight could be a turning point, a moment where everything they had been avoiding would come crashing down. "Ready?" Jason asked, his voice low but filled with resolve. Keanu looked at him and nodded. "As ready as we're going to be." They didn't need to say more. The stakes were clear. They were walking into a web of danger, and Jack was at the center of it all. With every step they took toward the address Jack had given them, the weight of the situation settled deeper into their bones. There was no turning back now. They arrived at the same bar where they'd encountered Jack the night before. The neon lights were dimmer tonight, flickering as if struggling to stay alive in the oppressive stillness. Keanu and Jason stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room. But there was no sign of Jack yet. It was as if the place had been abandoned, the air thick with tension. "Let's keep our eyes open," Keanu said quietly, as he and Jason found a quiet table in the corner. They sat with their backs to the wall, surveying the room, making sure no one could sneak up on them. It wasn't long before the door swung open again, and Jack stepped inside. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by something colder, more calculated. He was flanked by two men Keanu didn't recognize, both of them dressed in dark suits, their eyes scanning the room like predators on the hunt. Jason's hand subtly moved toward the inside of his jacket, where his weapon rested. But Keanu stopped him with a quick glance. They couldn't afford to make any moves too soon. This meeting had to be handled carefully. Jack had already warned them that things were about to change, but Keanu didn't fully understand what that meant. Jack made his way toward the table, and the two men flanked him as he sat down. He didn't waste time getting to the point. "I see you two are taking this seriously." "Good," Jack said, his voice colder than Keanu had ever heard it. "I was hoping you'd show up." "Cut the crap, Jack," Jason said, leaning forward. "What's this about? What do you want?" Jack smirked, leaning back in his chair. "I told you yesterday, Keanu. The game's about to change. I'm not the only one you need to worry about. There are bigger players involved now, and it's not just about the jobs anymore." Keanu kept his gaze steady. "What are you talking about?" Jack glanced at one of the men beside him, who handed him a small envelope. Jack slid it across the table to Keanu, his eyes never leaving him. "This is what you're really up against," he said, his voice laced with a dark satisfaction. Keanu picked up the envelope and opened it, his heart skipping a beat as he pulled out a set of photographs. The first was of an underground facility, something that looked like a warehouse, but with a far more sinister vibe. The second was a close-up of a man in a suit, a face that was unfamiliar, but the aura around him screamed power. The third photograph was a close-up of a woman, her expression intense, and she held a gun at her side. Keanu's eyes lingered on her for a moment, feeling an odd sense of recognition, though he couldn't place her. "What is this?" Jason asked, his voice sharp as he leaned in. "This," Jack said, "is just the beginning. These people control more than you realize. They're pulling the strings behind the scenes, bigger than any operation you've ever been a part of. And now you're involved whether you like it or not." Keanu's mind raced as he looked at the photographs. This wasn't just about mercenaries and contracts anymore. This was about a much larger network, one that had the power to manipulate everything, from politics to global events. The woman in the photo especially felt like a key piece of this puzzle. He couldn't quite figure out why, but she looked like someone from his past, someone important. Jason's voice broke through Keanu's thoughts. So what's our part in all of this, Jack? You've got us here. What do you want from us? Jack's eyes glinted as he leaned forward, his smile returning, though it was far more dangerous now. You're going to help me stop them. You've got skills that can't be replaced. I've already set things in motion, but I can't do it alone. This is bigger than any job you've ever had. You're either with me or you're against me. Keanu exchanged a look with Jason. The stakes had just gotten a lot higher. Jack wasn't just playing games anymore. He was asking them to join a war, one that could destroy everything they had worked for. Jason didn't hesitate. We're not doing this your way, Jack. If this is your idea of getting us involved, then you're going to regret it. Keanu held up a hand, silencing Jason before the situation escalated. He wasn't sure if they could afford to turn Jack down, not when they were this deep in. We'll consider it, Keanu said, his voice steady, but we need more information. We need to know exactly what we're up against before we make any moves. Jack nodded, his smile widening. Fair enough, but remember, time is not on our side. The people I'm talking about don't wait. They move fast. And soon you'll realize that you don't have much time left to make a choice. With that, Jack stood up, signaling to his men that it was time to go. But before he left, he paused, his eyes locking with Keanu's. Oh, and one more thing. The woman in the photo, her name's Alyssa. You'll be meeting her soon. Be ready for her. And with that, Jack and his men exited the bar, leaving Keanu and Jason alone with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. The game had truly begun. What do you think Keanu and Jason should do next? Should they trust Jack, or should they go after the bigger threat themselves? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter, where things get even more complicated. The next morning, the weight of Jack's words still hung heavy in the air. Keanu and Jason found themselves in a quiet, almost desolate diner, nursing cups of coffee, and trying to make sense of the mess they had been dragged into. The photos Jack had handed them felt like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit yet. Alyssa, the woman in the photo, was clearly important, but why did she look so familiar to Keanu? And who exactly was this shadowy organization Jack claimed to be working against? Keanu leaned back in his booth, the steam rising from his coffee as he stared out the window, lost in thought. Jason sat across from him, tapping his fingers impatiently on the edge of his mug. His usual confidence was starting to fray around. The edges, and Keanu couldn't blame him. They were in deep, and no amount of preparation could have prepared them for this. Do you think Jack's telling the truth? Jason asked, breaking the silence. This whole thing is starting to feel a lot bigger than just a couple of mercenaries, don't you think? Keanu took a slow sip of his coffee, his mind working through the possibilities. Yeah, something's off. Jack's not the type to play games unless there's a bigger agenda, and I don't like being in the dark, especially with someone like him. Jason leaned in, his eyes narrowing. But we don't know what we're up against yet. All we've got are some photos and a cryptic message. We need more answers. Keanu nodded. We will. Tonight we meet Alyssa. Jason's eyebrows shot up. Wait, you actually believe Jack? You're going to meet this woman? Keanu's gaze hardened, the determination in his eyes clear. We don't have a choice. Jack's right about one thing. Time's running out. If we don't figure this out now, we'll be too far behind. We have to play along, at least for now. Jason grunted, not looking entirely convinced, but he wasn't about to argue. Keanu's instincts had always been sharp, even if they sometimes led them down dangerous paths. And this time, it seemed they were both on the same page. Whatever. Jack's game was, they needed to understand it before it was too late. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Keanu and Jason prepped themselves for the night ahead, gathering what little information they could on Alyssa and trying to anticipate what kind of woman Jack had pulled into this dangerous web. They didn't have much to go on, just the photo Jack had shown them and a vague warning. But that was enough to make Keanu's stomach churn with a feeling of impending doom. By dusk, they were back at the same bar, waiting. Keanu's mind raced, but he knew there was no turning back. The meeting with Alyssa would reveal more than they could guess, and for all they knew, it might be their only chance to get answers. Ready for this? Jason asked, his voice tight with uncertainty as he sat across from Keanu, his eyes scanning the room. Keanu didn't answer immediately, his thoughts still lingering on the unknown. Then, with a sigh, he looked Jason in the eye. We don't have a choice. Just keep your head on a swivel. We don't know what she's capable of. Just then, the door to the bar swung open, and a hush seemed to fall over the room. Alyssa stepped inside, her presence undeniable. She was tall, with a commanding posture, dressed in all black, her long coat flowing behind her as she moved through the dimly lit bar. Her face was striking, yet there was something about her eyes that gave off an unsettling feeling. Cold, calculating, and yet familiar. Keanu's heart skipped a beat as he caught sight of her. There was no mistaking it now. She was the woman from the photo. But why did she seem so familiar? And why was Jack so insistent they meet her? Alyssa's gaze swept over the room until her eyes locked onto Keanu's. There was a brief flicker of recognition in her eyes, but she didn't make any move to acknowledge it. Instead, she walked straight to their table, her heels clicking against the wooden floor with every step. "Keanu," she said, her voice low and smooth, like honey mixed with steel. "It's been a long time." Keanu's pulse quickened. "Alyssa." The name came out more like a question than a greeting. It wasn't just the name that unsettled him. It was the feeling of knowing her from somewhere, as if they shared a history neither of them were ready to face. But what history? He couldn't place it. Jason sat back watching the exchange carefully, his hand resting near his side close to his weapon. He didn't trust her, and Keanu could sense it. Alyssa sat down without waiting for an invitation, her eyes never leaving Keanu. "I know you're wondering why I'm here," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm. "But before you ask me anything, you should know that everything Jack said was true and you don't have a lot of time." Keanu didn't break eye contact as he leaned forward. "What's going on, Alyssa? Who are you really working for?" Alyssa's lips curled into a faint, almost amused smile. "You're still asking the wrong questions, Keanu. That's your problem. You think in terms of sides, of good and bad. But you're about to see how complicated things really are." Jack wasn't exaggerating. "There are people pulling strings you don't even know exist. You're in deeper than you realize." Jason's eyes flicked between the two, his suspicion rising. "What's your game, lady?" Alyssa turned her gaze to Jason, and for the briefest moment there was something in her eyes that almost felt like empathy. "My game? You'll find out soon enough. But I'm here to help you, and I can give you what you need if you're willing to listen." Keanu could feel the tension building in the air, thick and suffocating. He had no idea whether he could trust Alyssa. But he also knew he didn't have a choice. Jack had set this up for a reason. This woman knew something crucial. And the truth, whatever it was something they needed to understand before it was too late. Just then her phone buzzed. She glanced down, her expression shifting for a fraction of a second, something darker. "It's time," she said, her voice colder now. "You're going to want to see this." Keanu didn't hesitate. "What's going on?" Alyssa didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slid her phone across the table to Keanu. On the screen was a live feed, a camera, feed showing an abandoned building, a familiar building, the same underground facility from the photo Jack had shown them. But there was more. Inside the building, men in suits were gathered, and one of them was holding a briefcase. The screen flickered, then zoomed in on a familiar face. It was Mike, the thug from the bar, and next to him, standing silently, was the man who had been in the photo, the one Keanu had yet to identify. Alyssa's voice cut through the silence. "It's happening now, Keanu. They've already moved, and if you want to stop this, you need to act fast. What do you think Keanu and Jason should do now? Should they trust Alyssa, or is this all part of a bigger trap?" Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for the next chapter, where things get even more intense. The screen on Alyssa's phone flickered once more, before freezing on the image of Mike and the man with the briefcase. Keanu's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the building in the footage. It was one of the many abandoned structures on the outskirts of the city, a place notorious for shady deals and underground operations. But this time it wasn't just a simple exchange. The atmosphere in the footage was tense, dangerous. There was something about the way the men moved, their calm but deliberate actions, that screamed that they weren't just criminals. These were professionals, big players in a game far more dangerous than anything Keanu and Jason had faced. Alyssa's voice broke through the silence in the bar, cutting through the weight of the moment. They're making their move. This is it, Keanu. If you're going to stop them, you need to act fast. That building is where everything comes. Together. The meeting tonight, the deals, and whatever Jack's really after. If you're not there in time, it's over. Keanu stared at the phone for a long moment, his mind racing. There was no doubt now. Whatever Jack had been pulling them into, it was much bigger than anything they'd imagined. They had to stop it before it was too late. Jason, who had been watching the video with quiet intensity, turned to Keanu. We don't have much time. If they're already inside, they might have the place locked down. We need a plan. Keanu nodded, his mind working quickly. We'll have to move fast. We'll take the side entrance. No one will expect that. We go in silent, assess the situation, and find out what they're doing with that briefcase. Jason's eyes narrowed. And if things go south, Keanu met his gaze, then we'll do what we do best. Take them down. But we're not going in blind. We have to be ready for anything. Alyssa leaned in, her voice sharp and urgent. You're not the only ones trying to stop this. But if you hesitate for even a moment, you won't be able to stop it at all. Keanu and Jason exchanged a glance. There was something about Alyssa's tone, something that told them she wasn't just playing the game, but was personally invested in whatever was happening. Was she on their side, or was she manipulating them for her own purposes? They couldn't be sure, but right now they didn't have the luxury of second-guessing their every move. Keanu stood up, sliding the phone back toward Alyssa. We'll go in now. Stay back and keep us posted if anything changes. Jason followed Keanu as they headed toward the door, their footsteps silent but quick. Outside, the city was alive with the usual evening rush, but the two men were focused only on their mission. There was no room for distraction. Not now. The drive to the building was tense. Keanu kept his eyes on the road, his thoughts consumed by the uncertainty of what awaited them inside. Jason's hands were clenched tightly around the door handle, his jaw set in determination. The closer they got to the building, the more Keanu felt the weight of the situation settling over him. They weren't just walking into a gang's den, they were stepping into a highly orchestrated operation, one that involved players who were far more dangerous than they could have ever anticipated. As they pulled up to the side of the building, Keanu signaled for Jason to stay low. They both knew the risks. They weren't dealing with amateurs. If they were spotted, everything could go sideways in an instant. Keanu and Jason slipped out of the car and moved quickly into the shadows, staying out of sight as they made their way toward the side entrance of the building. The building was massive, with a stark industrial exterior that seemed to absorb the dim streetlights. A large metal door was their entry point, locked, of course, but nothing Keanu couldn't handle. He had a few tricks up his sleeve when it came to getting inside places that weren't meant to be accessed. Ready? Keanu whispered as he pulled out a small tool from his jacket pocket. Jason nodded, his hand on his sidearm, ready for whatever was about to unfold. Let's do this. In seconds, the lock clicked open, and they slipped inside, moving quickly through a narrow, dimly lit hallway. They had no idea what they were about to walk into, but one thing was clear. Their time was running out. Inside, the building was eerily quiet, the only sound being their soft footsteps as they moved through the corridors. They could hear muffled voices in the distance, but no one had spotted them yet. The security cameras were sparse, and the layout of the building was simple. It was almost too easy. Keanu's instincts told him something wasn't right. This was too easy. They should have run into more resistance by now. They reached a stairwell and began ascending, the sound of their footsteps barely audible in the stillness. At the top they found a door, heavy, reinforced, but clearly used often. Keanu carefully pressed his ear to it, listening for any sounds. A low murmur filtered through the door, followed by the unmistakable clink of metal. Something was happening. On the other side, "Think this is it?" Jason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu didn't answer immediately. His mind raced. This was the moment. They could kick the door down, rush in, and take the enemies by surprise. Or they could wait, listen, and figure out what they were up against before making a move. "Let's move in," Keanu said quietly. The decision made. "We don't have time for anything else." With a swift motion, he opened the door and they stepped inside, guns drawn and eyes alert. What they saw took them both by surprise. The room was large, with high ceilings and dim lighting. A massive steel table sat in the center, and surrounding it were several figures, some familiar, others not. But it wasn't just the people in the room that made Keanu's heart race. It was what was on the table, the briefcase. It was open, and inside was a collection of files and documents, each one marked with a symbol that Keanu didn't recognize, but instantly knew meant trouble. There was no doubt. This wasn't just about a simple transaction anymore. This was something far bigger, and it was all unfolding right in front of them. Before they could make their next move, a voice cut through the tension. "Keanu, Jason." Alyssa's voice crackled through their earpieces. "You're not alone. Get out of there, now." Keanu's eyes widened. What the hell does that mean? But before she could answer, the door slammed shut behind them. Things just took a crazy turn. What do you think is going on? Who are these people, and what's in that briefcase? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter, where the truth will come crashing down. Keanu's heart raced as the door slammed shut behind them, the echo reverberating through the cold, dimly lit room. The sound was more than just an abrupt noise. It felt like the finality of a trap being sprung. They had walked into a situation they didn't fully understand, and now it seemed there was no way out. The air felt thick with tension as Keanu and Jason took a few steps forward, guns still drawn but held loosely at their sides, ready to act at any moment. The room wasn't what they had expected. It wasn't some rundown warehouse with crates stacked in the corner. It was sterile, almost clinical, with white walls and a long steel table in the middle. The briefcase on the table was no longer their primary concern. It was the people. There were 5 men standing near the table. Keanu recognized 2 of them immediately. The first was Mike, the same thug who had caused so much trouble back at the bar. The second was the man in the photo Jack had shown them, the man with the cold, calculating expression. His face was familiar, but Keanu couldn't quite place. Mike glanced at them with a grin, his eyes lighting up as if he had been expecting them. Well, if it isn't the famous Keanu Reeves and Jason Statham, you guys sure know how to make an entrance." Jason's eyes flicked to Keanu, his jaw tight. "I don't like this. Something's off." Keanu didn't respond immediately. He was trying to piece things together, but the pieces weren't fitting. Something had changed since they'd last seen Mike. There was a new sense of confidence in the man's posture, a hint of something darker in his eyes. Whatever was happening here, it was part of a much bigger game, and they were playing catch-up. The man Keanu didn't recognize stepped forward, his demeanor cold and commanding. He was tall, dressed in a sharp suit that looked out of place in a warehouse like this. His eyes locked onto Keanu with an intensity that made his stomach tighten. "I assume you're here to ask questions," he said in a voice that was smooth, almost too smooth. "But the real question is, why are you here at all?" Keanu didn't flinch. "We're here to stop whatever's going on, and to find out who's pulling the strings." The man raised an eyebrow. "Pulling the strings? You think you're in control of this situation? How quaint." Jason stepped forward, his gun still held loosely in his hand, but his stance was ready. "You can stop with the games. We want answers, and we're not leaving until we get them." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're not leaving at all." Keanu's instinct screamed at him to move, to get out of there before it was too late. But there was nowhere to run. He could feel it now. The walls were closing, and they were trapped. The door they had entered through was locked, and there were no other exits in sight. It was a setup all along. Before Keanu could react, the man in the suit snapped his fingers. The next thing they knew, 2 armed guards appeared from the shadows, guns aimed directly at Keanu and Jason. "Mike," the man said coolly, "take care of these 2. They won't be needing their weapons anymore." Keanu's muscles tensed, but he kept his calm. He wasn't going down without a fight. The situation had gone from bad to worse, and now he had to think fast. The odds were stacked against them, but Keanu had never been one to back down from a challenge. Mike stepped forward, cracking his knuckles with an arrogant smile. "You guys always think you can take on the world, don't you?" Jason's eyes narrowed. "You've underestimated us before, Mike. You won't get that chance again." The first guard lunged toward Keanu, but he was ready. With lightning-fast reflexes, Keanu sidestepped, grabbing the guard's arm and twisting it behind his back. He slammed the man into the steel table with a resounding thud, sending the guard crumpling to the floor. Jason wasn't far behind. In a fluid motion, he dispatched the second guard with a brutal elbow to the face, sending him sprawling to the ground. The two men were fast, efficient, but even now they knew this was only the beginning. Mike's grin faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Not bad. But you're not getting out of here so easily." Keanu and Jason both stood their ground, facing off against Mike and the others in the room. The man in the suit, however, hadn't moved. He simply watched, his expression unreadable. "You know," the man said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife, "you're really not in control of this situation. You've walked into something much bigger than you realize. And now you're in the way." Keanu's eyes flicked toward the briefcase. The documents inside were still sealed, but they were the key to everything. Whatever was going on, whatever Jack had gotten them into, it all pointed to that briefcase. The man in the suit knew it, and so did Keanu. "I don't care how big your operation is," Keanu said, his voice steady. "We're stopping you." The man's eyes glinted with a cold amusement. "You'll try. But in the end, it won't matter. You're already too late." Jason, ever the pragmatist, scanned the room for any other signs of danger. The air was thick with hostility, but there was something else now, something unsettling. He had a bad feeling that this wasn't just about taking them out. This was personal. And whoever was running the show here wasn't playing by the usual rules. Keanu's hand twitched, and in that split second, his eyes locked onto the briefcase once again. This was the moment they had been waiting for. They didn't have much time to make their move. The longer they stayed in this room, the more dangerous it became. Just then there was a loud crash from the back of the room, and the door slammed open with a force that shook the walls. Alyssa rushed in, her gun drawn and her face set in determination. "You're not alone," she said, her voice sharp. "Get to the briefcase, now." The man in the suit's eyes widened, and for a brief moment something flickered across his face. Anger? Fear? Keanu couldn't tell. But Alyssa's presence had clearly thrown him off balance. Keanu didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, he grabbed the briefcase and yanked it off the table, holding it tightly in his hands. "Alyssa!" Jason shouted. "We need to get out of here now." But before they could make their escape, a sharp, agonizing noise filled the room, loud and metallic. A new figure stepped into the doorway, their shadow casting a long, ominous silhouette. Keanu's blood ran cold. The figure was familiar, and it was the last person he ever expected to see. Wait, who's that figure? What's going to happen next? How will Keanu, Jason, and Alyssa get out of this alive? Drop your theories and thoughts in the comments, and make sure to subscribe, so you don't miss the next chapter. Things are about to get wild. The figure in the doorway stepped forward, and Keanu's heart dropped. The silhouette became clearer with every passing second, until the figure fully emerged from the shadows. It was none other than Jack, the very man who had dragged them into this mess in the first place. But this wasn't the Jack they'd met earlier, the jovial, confident, seemingly helpful guy who had appeared so trustworthy. No. The man standing before them now was colder, more dangerous. His eyes were devoid of warmth, replaced with a sharp, calculating focus. "You two really thought you were in control?" Jack's voice rang out, smooth and chilling. He stepped fully into the room, the door slamming shut behind him with a finality that sent a shiver down Keanu's spine. "You've been playing checkers while I've been playing chess." Alyssa's grip tightened on her gun, her expression unreadable. Jason's muscles tensed beside Keanu, ready for any sign of aggression. "You!" Keanu said, his voice low with disbelief. "You're the one behind all of this?" Jack smiled, but it was a smile that held no humor. "Oh, I'm just the messenger, Keanu. But yeah, I've been orchestrating this little show from the start. You two and Alyssa here were never meant to be anything more than pawns in a much bigger game." Alyssa's face twisted with anger, but there was something else behind her eyes, a flicker of realization. She had known more than she let on. Keanu's heart pounded as everything started to fall into place. "You knew." Jason's voice was harsh, accusatory. "You knew all along, and you didn't tell us." Alyssa didn't flinch. "I couldn't. If I had, you wouldn't have made it this far. Jack didn't just drag you into this. You were already part of the plan. Every move, every step. It was all designed. Keanu looked between them, still, trying to piece together the puzzle. Jack's smirk deepened as he stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. The game was always bigger than you, bigger than both of you, and now you're standing in the middle of it, holding the key. He pointed at the briefcase in Keanu's hands. Keanu's grip tightened around it. That briefcase, those files, had become the heart of this mystery, and now it was more crucial than ever. "But why us?" Keanu demanded, his voice sharp, with frustration. "Why drag us into this? What do you really want?" Jack's lips curled into a smile and he leaned against the wall, his posture relaxed but dangerous. "Why not you? You're both well-known, skilled, and, let's face it, useful. But more than that, you've got something that can't be replicated. Trust. Trust in each other, trust in me, and trust in your ability to take things to the limit. I needed you to believe in me, just long enough to get what I wanted. And now, here we are." Keanu felt the betrayal settle like a weight in his stomach. His mind raced, but there was no time to process it all. They were in too deep now. Jason stepped forward, his eyes burning with fury. "You're sick. You used us, and you used Alyssa. What's next, Jack? What do you want with those files?" Jack's smirk faded slightly, and his eyes flickered with an emotion Keanu couldn't quite place. Frustration? Anger? It was gone as quickly as it came. "The files, my friend, are worth more than you could ever imagine. You don't even know what's in them. But let me put it this way. This is bigger than just the three of us. This is about power, control, and the kind of secrets that can change the course of history." Keanu felt his grip on the briefcase tighten. What kind of secrets? Before Jack could answer, another voice filled the room, cold and unmistakable. "You're asking the wrong questions, Keanu." The man in the suit, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. He stepped forward, his presence commanding, and Keanu's pulse quickened as he recognized him. It was Vincent, the man who had been lurking in the background this entire time, pulling strings without anyone noticing. Vincent's smile was thin, calculating. "I'm afraid it's too late to change the game now. You've played your part, but now you're standing in the way." Keanu's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't just facing Jack anymore. He was facing a much larger operation, a web of lies and manipulation spun by people who had been planning this for much longer than he had ever suspected. "You're both a little late to the party," Jack added, his eyes glinting with malice. "And now that you're here, you're not going anywhere." Without warning, a set of armed men appeared from the shadows, surrounding Keanu, Jason, and Alyssa. The situation was rapidly spiraling, out of control. The walls were closing in, and no matter how fast they moved, they couldn't escape. Alyssa's gun was still in her hand, but she didn't raise it. She stood motionless, as if all the fight had drained from her. "Keanu," she said, her voice low but filled with urgency. "You need to get out of here. It's not worth it. This is bigger than you, than any of us." Keanu shook his head, his eyes fixed on Jack. "You don't get it. I'm not leaving until I know what's going on." "You've gone too far." Jack's eyes narrowed. "That's the problem with people like you, always thinking you can fix everything. You can't. This is bigger than your understanding, and now you're just in the way." Keanu's mind raced as he tried to process everything. The man in the suit, Vincent, Jack's involvement, Alyssa's betrayal, the files in the briefcase and the armed men closing in around them. It was all too much, too fast. But Keanu couldn't give up. Not now. Jason's voice cut through the tension. "Keanu, we need a way out." Keanu's eyes flicked toward the door. They were cornered. But he wasn't going to give up. Not yet. "Hold on," he muttered, his mind already working through their options. The briefcase, the files. It had to be important. Whatever was inside those documents could change everything. But what did it mean? And how could they stop Jack's plan before it was too late? Just then, Jack gave a small nod, and the armed men moved in closer, their weapons aimed at Keanu, Jason, and Alyssa. Can Keanu and his team escape this time? Who else is pulling the strings, and what's inside the briefcase that Jack is so desperate to get? What do you think will happen next? Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to keep up with the shocking twists in this thrilling story. The stakes have never been higher. The situation was dire. Keanu, Jason, and Alyssa stood surrounded by Jack, Vincent, and their armed men. The weight of the briefcase in Keanu's hand felt like an anchor, pulling him deeper into a web of chaos. The air was thick with tension, and every move they made seemed to be calculated, dangerous. Jack stood in front of them, his cold eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction. "This is it, gentlemen. You've made your choices and now you'll face the consequences. I really thought you'd understand that there's no way out." Keanu's mind raced. He couldn't let this be the end, not after everything they had been through. But as the armed men closed in on them, it seemed like escape was impossible. Jason's eyes locked with Keanu's. There was no time for words, just a silent understanding that this was the moment. They had one shot, just one. Alyssa shifted her stance slightly, her gun still in her hand but held loosely at her side. She was watching Jack carefully, waiting for the right moment. But Keanu knew the time for waiting was over. They needed to act. "What's in the briefcase, Jack?" Keanu asked, his voice steady, even though his pulse was racing. "What's so important that you're willing to sacrifice everything for it?" Jack's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't one of joy. It was a sneer. "You're not ready to understand, but you will soon enough. The contents of that briefcase are worth more than anything you could imagine. It's not just about money, Keanu, it's about power, control. And you, my friend, are standing in the way of something much bigger than yourself." Keanu's grip tightened on the briefcase. Power. Control. Those words echoed in his mind. Everything about this situation had been bigger than he'd realized. Bigger than he and Jason. Bigger than Alyssa. And even bigger than Jack's betrayal. The files in the briefcase held the key to everything. But what did they really mean? A flash of movement caught his eye. One of the armed men had taken a step forward, a signal for Jack to make the next move. The moment of hesitation was over. It was time to act. Jason suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the nearest gunman by the wrist and twisting it, sending the weapon flying from the man's grip. Alyssa was quick on his heels, taking down another guard with a swift, well-placed shot that left the man crumpled on the floor. Keanu didn't wait for a second. He rushed toward Jack, but Vincent stepped into his path, blocking his way. His eyes were cold and calculating, the last person Keanu wanted to face right now. "You really think you can fight your way out of this, Keanu?" Vincent sneered, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife at his side. "You're outmatched." Keanu's mind worked in overdrive. He couldn't waste time on Vincent. He needed to get to Jack. With a swift move, Keanu sidestepped Vincent, knocking him back, with a well-timed elbow that sent him stumbling. But the distraction was enough for Jack to make his move. Jack darted toward the briefcase, but Keanu was faster. He grabbed the briefcase with both hands and spun, aiming the contents toward the nearest wall. The thick steel door at the end of the room slammed open, revealing a small group of reinforcements rushing in. "Now!" Keanu shouted to Jason and Alyssa. Without hesitation, Jason charged forward, taking out another guard with a series of swift punches that sent him to the ground. Alyssa, ever the sharp shot, eliminated another threat in an instant, her movements precise and lethal. But they weren't out of the woods yet. Jack's eyes flashed with fury. "You'll regret this," he spat, his hand reaching for a hidden gun beneath his jacket. Keanu didn't give him a chance. With a fast move, he hurled the briefcase toward the reinforced door, where it crashed into a metal object, throwing off sparks. The contents of the briefcase spilled out, and Keanu's heart stopped for a moment. The documents inside weren't just papers. They were high-tech devices, chips, encryption tools, and data files that could bring down entire governments. Keanu had no idea what kind of information they contained, but one thing was clear. This was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Vincent made his move, drawing his knife and slashing at Keanu with deadly precision. Keanu barely managed to block the strike with his arm, feeling the sharp sting as the blade grazed his skin. Pain shot through his side, but he fought through it, determined not to let Vincent get the upper hand. Jason, noticing the struggle, rushed in, taking down Vincent in one smooth motion, disarming him and pinning him to the ground. Alyssa, seeing her opening, moved toward Jack, her gun aimed directly at his head. "You're done, Jack," she said, her voice cold and resolute. "This ends now." Jack's eyes widened as he realized his options were dwindling. He slowly raised his hands in surrender, a look of both disbelief and rage on his face. "You think you've won?" Jack hissed. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This is bigger than you." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "Then you can tell us all about it in prison." But before they could take another step, the sound of sirens grew louder from outside the warehouse. The authorities were closing in. This was their chance to end it all, before Jack's network had a chance to regroup. "Let's go," Jason said, his voice firm. "We can't stay here." Keanu nodded, grabbing the scattered devices and files from the briefcase. There was no time to analyze everything, but they couldn't leave it behind. As they moved toward the exit, Keanu could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. They had only uncovered the surface of something much bigger than they had ever imagined, and there were still so many questions left unanswered. They burst through the back door, the sound of sirens growing louder as they ran toward the alley. Their future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the battle wasn't over. What's going to happen to Jack? What's really inside the briefcase? And what does it mean for Keanu, Jason, and Alyssa? Who else is behind this operation? Drop your theories in the comments and make sure you subscribe to find out what happens next. The twists keep coming, and the stakes have never been higher. The streets were a blur as Keanu, Jason, and Alyssa ran through the alley, the sound of police sirens getting louder with each passing second. They had the evidence, but their mission wasn't over. The briefcase, with its enigmatic contents, was more than just a set of documents. It was the key to an underground empire they were only beginning to understand. "We can't stop now," Jason panted as he dashed alongside Keanu. His eyes were sharp, scanning every corner of the street for potential threats. "The police will be here any second, and Jack won't go down that easily." Keanu's mind raced. He didn't want to leave a trail, but the weight of the briefcase was becoming unbearable. Every step felt like it could be their last. The information inside was dangerous, and whoever was pulling the strings behind Jack was even more dangerous. Alyssa, who had been silent up until now, suddenly spoke. "We need to go to ground. Jack is part of something much bigger than we thought. And whatever's in those files, it's going to be more than we can handle if we don't get ahead of it." Keanu nodded, feeling the weight of her words. This was no longer just a fight for survival. This was about stopping an operation that could destabilize everything. "We need to find somewhere safe," Keanu said. "Get the information to the right people." Jason shot a look at Keanu. "But who do we trust now? Everyone we've met so far has had their own agenda." Alyssa turned to face both men, her eyes filled with a steely determination. "We trust each other. That's all we can do right now, and I have a plan. Follow me." They continued down the alley, their pace quickening as they neared an old industrial building. It looked abandoned, but Alyssa knew better. She had contacts who could help them disappear, at least temporarily. As they neared the entrance, the sound of distant voices echoed from behind. They weren't alone anymore. Jack's men were closing in. "They're right behind us," Jason warned. "We need to move fast." Alyssa didn't hesitate. She pressed a hidden panel on the side of the building, revealing a small, inconspicuous door. It was their way in, and possibly their way out of the madness. Without a word, they slipped through the door, disappearing into the darkened interior. Inside, the building was eerily quiet, the only sound their heavy breathing. Alyssa led them through the narrow hallways, her steps purposeful. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking deeper into a trap, but he pushed the thought aside. They had no choice now but to trust Alyssa. They reached a small, secure room at the back of the building. Alyssa went straight to a computer terminal and started typing rapidly, pulling up encrypted files. She glanced back at Keanu and Jason, her expression grim. "I'm sending the information to someone I trust," she said, her voice low but confident. "They'll be able to decrypt everything, but we can't stay here. Jack's people won't. Stop until they get those files." Keanu stepped forward, eyeing the screen. "Who are you sending this to? We don't know who we can trust anymore." Alyssa didn't look up from the screen. "A friend in the government, someone on the inside. They're our best shot at stopping whatever Jack and his people have planned." Jason clenched his fists. "And if they're playing us too?" Alyssa paused, then gave a tight nod. "Then we'll deal with it. Together." The door to the room suddenly burst open and Keanu's heart skipped a beat. Jack's men had found them. "Move!" Keanu shouted. Jason dove toward the door, knocking one of the armed men to the ground. Alyssa quickly hit a button on the terminal, sending the files to their contact just as the first gunshot rang out. The noise was deafening, and the room went into chaos. "Go!" Keanu yelled, grabbing Alyssa by the arm and pulling her toward the back exit. Jason was already ahead, clearing the way as he disabled another guard with a swift punch. They ran through the narrow corridor, their hearts pounding in their chests. Just as they reached the back exit, a figure stepped out from the shadows, Jack. He stood blocking the exit, a gun in his hand and a smirk on his face. "You think you've won?" Jack's voice was dripping with disdain. "You're nothing but pawns, you always were." Keanu's chest tightened with anger. "This ends now, Jack." But Jack wasn't done. "You still don't understand, do you?" He stepped forward, and in that moment, the air felt thick with tension. "You've been chasing the wrong thing. The game was never about you." Keanu's mind raced, but there was no time to think. Jack fired a shot, grazing Keanu's shoulder. The pain was immediate. But Keanu fought through it, not giving Jack the satisfaction of seeing him falter. "Move!" Keanu shouted to Jason and Alyssa. Without hesitation, Jason launched himself at Jack, knocking him to the ground in a fierce struggle. Alyssa was already moving toward the back exit, but Keanu didn't follow her. He couldn't let Jack get away. Again. Not after everything they'd been through. The fight between Jason and Jack was brutal, both men skilled in combat. But Jack had the advantage of surprise. He managed to get in a punch that sent Jason stumbling back. Jack raised his gun, but before he could take another shot, Keanu was on him. With all the force he could muster, Keanu tackled Jack to the ground, knocking the gun from his hand. The two men struggled, each trying to get the upper hand. Finally, with a swift move, Keanu pinned Jack down, his breath ragged as he stared into Jack's eyes. "You're finished, it's over." Jack's eyes gleamed with something between hatred and amusement. "You don't understand," he muttered. "This is just the beginning." Keanu didn't respond. He didn't need to. With one final push, he knocked Jack out cold, his body going limp beneath him. "We're done here," Keanu said, standing up and looking at Jason and Alyssa. "Let's go." Together, they walked toward the back exit, the sound of sirens, growing louder in the distance. The police would be here soon. But for now, they had the information they needed. They had stopped Jack, and they had put a stop to something far more dangerous. As they disappeared into the night, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that the game wasn't over. But for now, they had won. Did Keanu and his team truly stop Jack's operation? Or is this just the calm before the storm? What's really in those files and what will happen next? Drop your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the shocking twists to come. The fight for control is far from over.